time. Hi, everybody. This is Milda DeVoe, and MM DeVoe is my writing name. And this is the Pen Parentis Literary Salon for rescheduled April, now June in coronavirus during Black Lives Matter. It is the craziest and most cool thing that you will do this Tuesday night, probably. Unless you're way neater than me. Anyway, so I am here currently with three phenomenally fabulous writers, and Christina will be joining us in just a second. In fact, she is joining us right now. And so now we're all here, and I just wanted to tell you, so Christina Chiu is our curator. Christina, you can wave at the people. Hi, people. And so Christina is the author of Beauty, which was a 2040 books imprint, just got published by Santa Fe Writers Project, and she is our curator. I am the founder of Pen Parentis. Sorry, I'm a little nervous because I have never moderated 5 people at once, and I'm trying to calm down and get it going right. So let's see. So Pen Parentis was founded in 2014. Or incorporated in 2014 as a nonprofit, and it is a 501c3 nonprofit. And this particular Pen Parentis Literary Salon is made possible with public funds from the Creative Engagement grant, which was supported by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council and administered by the LMCC. So thanks to the government. And this event was also funded in part by poets and writers through public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. I want to thank also our online donors because your contributions help us put these monthly salons on, as well as supporting our annual writing fellowship for new parents and our weekly accountability meetups. And anybody who is out there who is a writer and a parent, you are more than welcome to join us. We have memberships that range from basic, which is for free, and to our supporting title members, which get a lot of perks and support us so we can put on more stuff for free. So it's kind of this cool cycle. Our entire mission is very simple. It is to keep writers writing after they have kids. Done. That's it. Stay on creative track. So our salons are here to show you that it can be done. It is like literally by example. These 3 people have children, and yet they have published stuff, and they have even won awards and become amazing and famous and all the things. So you can too. So I'm going to let Christina introduce our phenomenal authors, and then I will take us all backstage while one at a time they do readings. And that's what we're going to do in the salon. And then we're going to get together and we're going to talk about technology, writing, craft. Everybody who's out in the audience, you should know that you can you can chat us through either Facebook or YouTube. On Facebook, you can find us on the Facebook Live, and on YouTube, it should be the link that you're watching right this second. So you can always text us, and we will try to read your comments out loud. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Christina Chiu, and she will tell us a little bit more about what's going on.
Hi, everyone. Tonight, we have a reading about technology and literature. We have 3 incredible authors. We're really lucky to have them tonight. We were supposed to have these authors in April, and we had to postpone, obviously, because of COVID. But luckily, we were able to have them come today. So thank you so much for coming back and being here with us and rescheduling. We really appreciate it. We have 3 readers, Helen Schulman, Deborah, Paredez, and Davon Loeb tonight. Our first reader is going to be Helen Schulman. Helen, I know, and Milda actually knows because we studied with Helen when we were at Columbia. And she is the most incredible person in the universe. So this is not Helen's first time here at Pen Parentis. I think it's your second, right? And her last novel was a New York Times bestseller.
And ripped our hearts out.
Yes, and
Cautionary tale.
A great teacher. She teaches, you should study with her if you get a chance. Anyway, so she teaches creative writing at Columbia. You teach at Columbia, right?
No, in the New School.
Oh, New School. Sorry. Yeah, where you moved. So if you're looking for a really good teacher, you should go to music school for Helen. Anyway, I shouldn't have said that. Helen, over to you. Thank you so much.
All right, let me just take a little bit of moment and put everybody else backstage real quick. Sorry, by Deborah Paredez and Davon, moving you from there. And now we have Helen, and I'm gonna also leave, and then we'll just have Helen.
Oh my God, bye guys. Thank you, Christina, that was so sweet. I'm gonna read to you from this book of mine, my latest book, Come With Me. It came out in 2018, really 2019 came out, the end of December. And I'm going to read from the opening, so I don't have to tell you anything, so I don't have to bore you too much. It was a cool blue morning. Later at dawn, which was coming too fast, Amy wasn't ready yet to face the day. Sunlight would layer the sky into swaths of paler blues, grays, pinks, but not now. Now the whole world, or at least her ludicrously perfect patch of it, was encased in a clear, inky gel, an atmospheric snow globe, seemingly flawless. Amy had just been awakened by a tactile hallucination, sensing her phone vibrating minutes before the alarm actually was set to go off. She grabbed it from her nightstand, saving Dan that juddering, hand-buzzery sound, a gag that came daily like Uncle God's worn-out prank. These days, her nights comprised marathon hours of lacy sleep, in and out of dreams so wild and disturbing, the interruption by her own inner alarm clock could be viewed less as a textbook case of conditioning, Pavlov's wake-up call, and more accurately as an act of self-preservation. She moved Dan's open laptop carefully off his belly, closed it, and set it down onto the cream-colored cut pile carpeting on her side of the bed. Dan must have fallen asleep while updating his LinkedIn file. Back in the day, when he first started out in newspapers, he often conked out while writing on yellow legal pads, and Amy had had to pry the pens out of his hand. The attic still held several ink-stained coverlets documenting that period. Time capsules, so last century. Quietly, she slipped on a pair of running tights and exited their bedroom. If she tiptoed down the stairs and kept Squidward, their psychotic Vizsla, from barking, if she put on the sneakers she'd left to air outside the back door, she could hit the ground running. She'd circle around the faculty ghetto, following the campus blue lights like breadcrumbs, then up into the hills. She'd head for the dish, an old radio telescope that probably sort of functioned, sitting close to the top of one of the highest local gradients. If she was in luck as she ran, she'd see the fog lift and the light of day do the lifting. On a clear morning, the view was all the way to San Francisco. Amy didn't have time to do the whole 7-mile loop today. Thing 1 and Thing 2, as they referred to the little boys, they were idents, had to be hauled out of bed by 6:30 if any of the stuff that needed to happen before they went to school was to occur. Corralling of homework, clothes, toothbrushing, deodorizing poor little Theo, Thing 2, who on top of the rest of his issues appeared to be showing signs of way early puberty, while Miles, his exact replica, had not a single solitary hair where it counted, nor one of Theo's hurdles. Amy poked a nose in their room before shutting the door carefully. No signs of life in the trundle beds, same mop of carroty curls exploding like a burst of fireworks on each pillow, always a surprise. Though she and Dan had dark hair, although recently Dan's was shot through with silver, as though he'd stuck his finger in a light socket and it had been electrified. She supposed in a way he had. Then she moved down the hall to check on Jack. In her oldest boy's room, Lily was the only one up, still lounging in bed, her loose blonde ponytail fanned out seraphically against her flowered pillowcase, blue eyes so bright they startled, black mascara melting prettily beneath her lashes, daisy-eyed, Jack's girlfriend. She and Amy waved to each other via Skype, Jack's laptop permanently open on his desk, angled toward his bottom bunk. Lily lived in Texas now, although she was a constant presence in Amy's household. She'd moved 2 years ago, 2 weeks after the kids began dating. and slept under a fluffy pink duvet surrounded by stuffed animals, a photo of a calla lily framed above her bed. It was a Maplethorpe. Jack had found the print online. He had sent it to Lily for her 16th birthday. Their whole relationship, it seemed, was conducted over devices, although apparently not all of it. Amy gently covered up her sleeping son's bare chest with his quilt out of some weird sense of propriety, even though she knew Lily had seen it all before. They'd had sex. Cindy, Lily's mother, had told Amy as much in an email after Lily had visited last summer. God knows what the kids did together over the internet. Now Amy poised her phone's clock in front of Jack's webcam. It was 2 hours later in Texas, and she didn't want Lily to be late for school. For this, she was rewarded with a sweet smile. Downstairs, Squidward was sleeping in his crate in the kitchen. Amy dug his chow out in fistfuls so he wouldn't hear the kibble hit the metallic bowl. Asleep, the animal was magnificent, a deep glossy auburn. As he doggy snored, his muscled belly shimmered like sunset on a lake she'd never seen, maybe in Maine or Vermont. Gently, she unbolted the crate and shoved the tin bowl inside. He opened a wild eye. He had two settings, it seemed, on and off, and then began to scarf down his breakfast. Quickly, she refilled his water bowl, set it down, and then unlocked her back door. Still blue outside. She could smell the eucalyptus. She pulled yesterday's socks out of her sneakers, which were a little wet with dew, sat down on the back step, and put them on. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Squidward dashed out past her, jet-propelled and ready for his morning run. They paid a Stanford track star to take him out for an hour at midday. It was a delicate matter right now, keeping the kid on payroll. Dan was around. They needed to think about money, but the last thing she wanted was to further rock his confidence. She obediently fell into step behind Squidward, and they turned left, running toward the elementary school. She would escort the twins there later that morning, empty with its retro playground, slides and tire swings and little habit trails. No one could guess the tortures that awaited poor Theo inside. Amy had a lone real friend at work, the CFO Naresh. His wife, a venture capitalist, was one of their angel investors. Naresh and Nancy put their kids in the local Waldorf school, which was vehemently anti-tech. Perhaps without the distraction of computers and video games, Theo could learn to read there too. But Naresh said even in the 5th grade, the kids spent all day knitting and digging for worms in the dirt. 30-something grand a year to live like a sharecropper's child in Appalachia. Dan would have a seizure. A half-mile in, and Amy caught her stride, clearing away the cobwebs in her hips and knees as they became oiled by synovial fluid, and then the onset of that weird divine heat that spread across her sacrum like tiger balm. It was one of those subtle bodily shifts that signaled the difference from starting a run to running, the way falling in love that first time had transformed the impatience of waiting for life to begin into the exhilaration of actually living. Her breath even and deep. Soon she would enter a different plane, no more monkey mind. Running made everything better. It was a vacation from her life. What lengthy list of crap could she not think about for the next hour? It was what sex did, now only birthday and anniversary weekends away, or when the kids were at sleepovers at some other hapless mother's house, filling her with liquid light. The skin on her arms prickled beneath the morning chill, and also the fascia on her right shin. The body was so fantastically surprising sometimes. Stretch a hamstring while lying on her back and feel the music shoot up and out of her spine and through her cranium. Craziness. The furnace of her sacrum was working its hot magic now. Then she saw him at the school. Fuck no, thought Amy. In shorts, tiva, and a hoodie. Such pretensions he'd have to lose the hoodie. A yesteryear cliche. He was sitting on a swing waiting for her. Amy, said Donnie. Under the playground lights, he looked just like her old roommate from college, Lauren, except for the hairy legs. Wiry and short, blonde, a ferrety, handsome-ish face, which made sense because he was Lauren's son. When he'd come to Stanford 3 years before, to be nice, Amy had invited him over for a welcome brunch and to do laundry. Although the machines in the dorm were newer than hers, Donnie pointed this out, an Energy Star qualified. Plus, he sent his out to a campus fluff and fold. Now he was her boss.
Thank you. That was beautiful. So, how does technology play out in the rest of this novel?
Well, Amy works for her college roommate's son, who's a junior at Stanford, and he has his own tech company, and he thinks he's discovered an algorithm that can tell you what would have happened if you'd made different decisions in your lives. It's like multiverse theory. So he uses her as his guinea pig, and she goes on this sort of torturous ride through what could have been, what maybe has been in another universe, while her life at home completely explodes for other reasons.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So did you have the idea to make tech such like the theme, like not the theme, but like the biggest aspect of this book, or did you have the idea, or did it just sort of happen as you were writing?
No, I've been really obsessed with tech for a long time, even though I'm totally hopeless at it. And I mean, I couldn't even get on my computer to see you. My husband had to run in with his computer, like really cyber challenged. But my husband grew up on the Stanford campus. And so for the last 35 years, I've been going there, and watching Silicon Valley happen was completely fascinating to me. And all the things, how it's changed our life. And honestly, it all terrified me when I wrote this book, though right now, without it, I would not be seeing you. So.
It's hilarious to think that when we all were in Columbia together, there was none of this.
Nothing.
None of this even existed.
There was email.
Yeah. And now it's like transforming our lives and making it possible for us to have actual dialogues with lots of writers, like about books that are about technology. Like there's so many levels of technology that have happened since then. It's bizarre.
Well, a lot of times people write to me now because the teenagers in this book carry their whole relationship online. They have sex online, they're together online, they're together 24 hours a day online, they eat dinner together online. And people write to me and say, how did you know that's what we were going to be doing? But we were already doing it. You know,
and yeah, so we'll talk more later when we have everybody on the thing. But I'm going to take you off, Helen, and let as Christina is introducing the next person. So let me figure out how to do that. Christina, you can go ahead and introduce the next person.
Okay. Davon Loeb is the author of the memoir, The In-Betweens. He's the assistant poetry editor at Bending Genres and has been twice nominated for the Pushcart Prize. Everyone, please welcome Davon.
Hi, everybody. It is so nice to be able to be here. I teach high school, so my whole life and my everyday has changed now with being remote. I'm living what it's like with a 2-year-old and one on the way to try to find time to write in between parenting and and working. But it can be done. So my daughter went to sleep like 20 minutes ago, so I'm happy to be here with everyone. So I wanted to start off with a piece called My Mother's Mother. And it's about my grandmother. This is sort of one of my favorite pieces in my book. I'm just putting a timer on for myself. Okay, so my mother's mother. But when I imagine my mother's mother, all I can see is her tying an apron around her waist, and there is a dark smudge in the middle, like how some old white crowd stood watching the swinging neck around someone's neck that my mother's mother knew. And yet still she soaked her hands, wrinkled and wet, the brine, black leather and blinking soap suds, watching china and other plates from other places she would never go. And so what if she lumbered, she stretched, and she cleaned, and she wiped her tired brow because her shackled wrist could only earn enough change for the backseat ride on the bus back home. And while cleaning those houses, polishing wood and dusting corners, she and the many other black women she knew reminisced about some old promises. Someone long ago said that they'd all get a mule and 40 acres. Someone long ago said that the promise would linger, the notion that one day things would be better, that they finally have a leg up, start fresh, start new, endless possibilities. And this even motivated some of those women to scrub harder, dig deep into their souls. But my mother's mother would say, you promised nothing but your first name. She was a pessimist, or maybe she was just considering things like lineage. She considered how they used to be slaves, all of them, with no saving accounts, no trust funds, no land, no family money. Rather, they were unshackled in 1865 and kicked in the ass. Get, their masters said, and they got going with some scraps of skin still in their backs. Then again, that's just one chapter in her story, one narrative that belongs to part of her, but not all of her. And it's important for me to tell you that her life is not to be defined by all that struggle, that there was beauty in her body and skin before it was bent and broken and blackened, that her skin was just skin before. And maybe there's irony in all of this, thinking back on her childhood, the whole Southern home, her living life normal, breakfast at 7, lemonade, Sunday school, and the way love smelled like butter and bread around the dinner table. And I'm so ashamed by how surprised that makes me feel, how hard it is to imagine my mother's mother first and her color second, how it was so much quicker to assume what it meant to be her was what it meant to be Black and nothing else with no separation. Maybe it's instinctual to take on her narrative and tell you those prerequisite hardships about inequality, discrimination, and what it might have meant to be Black back then. But to be honest, I don't know. She never told me. I just know her name and her face and the way she could tell me the past as if it was yesterday. She was born in 1932, one of 8 children, 5 brothers and 3 sisters, from a big family, but from a bigger family, God's family, my mother would say. So one of those sisters died as a baby. They knew it wasn't the end. They knew God had just brought her home sooner rather than later. And they buried that little baby somewhere out on their farm. And on the 3rd day, the sun said, rise. And flowers grew from out that grave, lilies and May apples. It was a miracle, some proclaimed, and everyone believed it. Because back then, on any given Sunday, you could see optimism alive on those mornings, alive in the sun, alive in their eyes, how it was all the same. And they hummed the old hymns together, hands held like a ladder, strong and bound and candid while walking to church. Nothing could stop them, not rains, nor winds, or any weather, because Sunday, family, and God was rightfully theirs, if nothing else was in America. And even though they barely owned their own name, they did own a house somewhere in rural Coy, Alabama. And no matter how bad things were for Black people in America, my mother's mother would say, we still had our pride. She'd say, no matter if they told us we could drink from this, but couldn't drink from that, if we could sit there, but not here, could go to that school, not this one, we still had that house. She said this with pride because ownership is undefined by race, because blood and sweat, no matter if one was Black or white, it would always be the same color. And that house that her family owned, her daddy built from the ground up. It was beautiful by any standard, for he built it with callus and hammer, with muscle and brawn. And as she said, with God in his belly, pushing his body, strengthening his heart, board by board, stretching from floor to roof, an altar to his family. My mother's mother would say that maybe some things were built better back then, things like family. They owned that house outright, but did not own the 160 acres of farmland. It was leased land, and the real owner said my mother's mother and her family could stay there as long as they wanted, forever and a day, but the land would never be theirs, for their skin would never change. They could build there, start their families, marry, give birth, and die. But never in any deed would it say, this land is your land. And in Coy, her family was one of the only Black families to actually own a home, to actually say that this is ours. Some people they knew, other lots from church, side-eyed, whispered about her family going back home to the big house where the white people let them stay. And even white families across the street coming out of their church looked with envy in their eyes, knowing they were trotting back to a little shack. But my mother's mother and her family walked out of the church service with their heads high and their Sunday best, elaborate prim-bill, box hats, skinny ties, two-toned Oxfords, dresses like giant flowers, and their Bibles at their sides, shielding from whatever wasn't God's will. And somebody, white or Black, probably said they looked so much different than how they first arrived in the South. The land surrounding the house was covered by hundreds of trees, thick, swollen, sturdy trees, trees that never warped under the hulking Alabama sun, trees whose boughs never broke, trees whose roots never loosened, trees for however many years lived in testament to never change. They were imposing and often frightened my mother's mother. As a child, she swore they watched her, She said there were crows in some, crows that crowded the branches and called viciously. And in other trees, when the wind blew, she thought she heard the willows lean in and whisper to each other, maybe saying, "We're finna get ya." And how some of the biggest trees, the ones that reached the far ends of the property, stood heavy and lopsided as if still holding the weight of something. And that those were the trees that her daddy told her about, told my mother's mother what those trees were really for.
Wow, that was beautiful.
I want to applaud. There needs to be applause. There's no like applause.
I'm like getting eaten up by mosquitoes right now. So
Oh no, not the
I was like trying not to scratch.
Where are you?
I'm outside of my house.
I mean, I know you're outside, but I mean, where are you in the United States?
I live in South Jersey, almost in the woods, across from the lake.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's funny with the I call them Zooms, but they're not. This isn't Zoom, but it's funny that you could be anywhere. Like we've had, like people from all over. But go ahead. Sorry, Christina, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, what I love is that this is like a memoir, and it's lyrical, and it's very very literary, but the episodic nature of the way that this book is set up, kind of, it does have that like almost modern, I don't want to say tech feel, but it has a different feel to it that's so new and unique, and I absolutely loved it. Is there a reason why you chose to do that?
So part of it is I'm a poet by nature, and I think about when I went into my MFA program, I was a poet. I was writing poems, and so that piece itself was a poem. Just the very beginning about my mother's mother having the smudge in the middle and carrying plates. That's really where it started. So I think that I wrote it in a way where it's not like the traditional start from finish memoir, because I wrote it out of sequence. I wrote them as poems, and then I sort of found a way to give it a little more meat where the stories needed to grow a little bit, and then also trusting that some stories are only a paragraph and some are only a page. So it was really my take on my story, because I think that as people, we are, our narratives are broken up. So I wanted to try to have that reflect the actual physical structure of the book, reflect, what it's like being a person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really love that choice. It's
okay. It's really exciting to have you here now, because your story so much bridges a lot of what's going on here. Do you want to talk about that? I have no questions that are good.
A lot of this book is about my family history, about being half African American and then half white Jewish. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is tell stories that were told to me. But I guess the point about today is that the history for a lot of African Americans is fragmented, is broken. And so I try to address that with a lot of the times, even just my verbs, just this would have happened, this should have happened, this could have happened. And that's really purposeful, because I can't tell a narrative when I don't know all of it. Mm-hmm. But it does feel like these stories are even more important than they were months ago. Not for me, because I know that writers like me have been here, but for writers or audiences who are not used to reading work like this.
Doesn't it feel, this time period just feels like everybody has become an ambassador for whatever they know, whatever small little bit of information that they have that fits into the entire racial narrative of the entire country. Everybody is like, this is my little tiny gem. Can you take this gem and put it together? And I feel like your memoir is one of those gems where it's like, there is important information in this brilliant little thing. You know what I mean?
And I try not to be forceful about how I felt about race, because like you said, this is just my perspective. And I think about my older brother who isn't half white, and his experience with being a black man in America is so different than mine. So I felt like I had to write stories that were my stories, my struggles, not the entire black narrative, because that just didn't seem authentic.
That's kind of fascinating that even within your own family, you have very unique perspectives on what it means. That's really cool. All right, so I'm going to put you backstage, and we're going to have more conversations. Hold on.
Sure.
Sorry to be so techy.
No.
Okay. Christina, you can introduce the next.
Yes. Our next reader is Deborah Paredez. The last time I saw Deborah, I was actually with Milda at the Pen American.
Oh, you were great.
She was standing
giving an award.
Giving out an award. She's a poet and an interdisciplinary performance scholar whose lectures and publications examine Black and Latinx popular culture. She is very, very smart, and she looks awesome in a black pantsuit.
Thank you.
Everyone, please welcome Deborah.
Thank you, Christina. You looked quite awesome that night as well. I am going to read tonight from my book that just came out in April, a book of poems called Year of the Dog. And I'm going to actually try to share my screen just to show an image. We'll see if I can. It will let me. Let's see.
If you can't do it, you can always email me the image, and I will share it with our audience, and I will put it up on our website so that it can be there, like, as a reference if it becomes.
Is it showing?
I'm not seeing it. No,
it's not. Okay, I think it's in the waiting room. So okay, that's.
Oh, I'll look for it. Oh, wait, yes, I do. Hold on.
Okay. So I just want to share this image because it relates very much, I think, to this idea of technology, and I can talk more about it after the reading. But my book is about a lot of things, and in part it's about kind of women and disaster and the ravages of war in particular as they affected Latinx communities. And in much of it takes place during the Vietnam era. And it is an era, as many of us know, that was really kind of known for its photographic documentation. And the ways we've come to know and remember that era is through the technology of photography. And my father served in Vietnam, and he was, oops, sorry about that. He was someone who took, like many folks there, took snapshots. And the poetry collection intersperses poems with images, very iconic images from the war. So the very middle image you might recognize is from the photo of Marianne Vecchio at Kent State during the Kent State massacre. And the photos on the side are from snapshots my father took. And so the work does a lot of work with collage and kind of visual rhymes in this case, and echoes of, in this case, body parts. So I can talk more about that after I read. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I will start to read. Wife's Disaster Manual. This is a villanelle. When the forsaken city starts to burn, after the men and children have fled, stand still, silent as prey, and slowly turn back. Behold the curse. Stay and mourn the collapsing doorways, the unbroken bread in the forsaken city starting to burn. Don't flinch. Don't join in. Resist the righteous scurry and instead stand still, silent as prey. Slowly turn your thoughts away from escape. The iron gates unlatched, the responsibilities shed. When the forsaken city starts to burn, surrender to your calling. Show concern for those who remain. Come to a dead standstill. Silent as prey, slowly turn into something essential. Learn the names of the fallen. Refuse to run ahead when the forsaken city starts to burn. Stand still and silent. Pray. Return. A number of the poems, several of the poems in the book take up the very mundane language of the idiom. And I wanted to sort of take very everyday or very deeply familiar things like photographs we think we know or forms of language we think we know, and to really try to push them to their limit to get at both the kind of ravages of war and how it tears everything asunder, but also in particular how it tears bodies apart. And so I chose idioms with body parts. A show of hands. My father taught me never to show my hand. Always play the hand you're dealt. Don't bite the hand that feeds. You gotta hand it to him. He lived his life hand to mouth. Even before Nam, he knew close only counts in horseshoes, and hand grenades go hand to hand combat. Idle hands are the devil's play into the enemy's, hand it over and out of his hands, ringing. A bird in hand is worth two. In the bush, he wasn't so good with his hands, took his life into his own blood on his hands, on the one hand and on the other. Many of the poems in the book Year of the Dog take place in the Year of the Dog, which was the year of my birth, 1970, when my father was preparing to leave for Vietnam, and many other events were happening around the country. And this poem actually takes place in December of 1969, just before this, in Chicago, Illinois, upon the murder of Fred Hampton. And it's during his murder, his partner, Deborah Johnson, a Kuanajeri, was in bed with him, was 8.5 months pregnant when he was murdered. So this poem is for her. Lightning. You didn't look down or back, spent the fractured minutes studying each crease and curve of the law men's faces. So later you could tell how it happened, how you crossed over his body, how you kept your hands up, how you didn't reach for anything, not your opened robe, nothing. How they said he's good and dead, how you crossed over the threshold, how you lifted one and then the other slippered foot across the ice, how you kept yourself from falling, how your bared belly bore the revolver's burrowing snout, how, when the baby starts to descend, it's called lightning, though it feels like a weight you cannot bear. Lightning is when you know it won't be long before it's over. I think I'll just read one more. This last poem is called Self-Portrait in the Time of Disaster. I wrote it long before this current moment, but here we are. All morning, my daughter pleading, outside, outside. By noon, I kneel to button her coat, tie the scarf to keep her hood in place. This is her first snow, so she strains against the ritual, spooked silent, then whining, restless under each buffeting layer, uncertain how to settle into this leashing. I manage at last to tunnel her hands into mittens, and she barks and won't stop barking. Her hands suddenly pause. She's reduced to another state, barking all day in these restraints. For days after, she howls into her hands, the only way she knows now to tell me how she wants out. Thank you.
That was lovely. Thank you.
Thanks.
So how did you get the collection together? Did you have a strong sense of the collection as you were going, or did you finish it and then have to go back and revise and add and take things out? And, and I mean, there are the collage pieces too, right? So how did that work together?
I think in some ways the collection began when I was a kid, and I would pore over the photo album my father had of snapshots he had taken while he was in Vietnam, in Phu Bai and in Da Nang. And I would pore over those photos so often because the war was never spoken about in our home, right? It was something that, like many families that, have people who've survived the war, and issues of PTSD and all kinds of things, it became, especially in that era in the 70s, really something there was so much silence around. And so these photographs became this thing that I felt like if I could just unlock that, if I could just figure out, like, maybe they could tell me something and I could speak to the silence. And so, here I am, 50, like many decades later. And when I kind of thought, like, I'm done talking about war, really, it's kind of over, I'm over it. But then my parents had moved and my mom actually sent me the photographs and I started going through them again. And I became fascinated with thinking about ideas of documentation, right? I think for so many folks of color and for Latinos in particular, our whole notion, our status as citizens are often determined vis-a-vis documentation. And so then I think we have a real sophisticated, sometimes questioning of the very forms of documentation, right? And how, particularly for Vietnam, these iconic photos become the way by which we know things, but so much is absent from them, even as much as so much is present. And so I just began to kind of play with those photos, and then I would really go dive deep into the story of Marianne Vecchio. And then that poem would emerge and I would kind of tear apart that photo. And so it happened, I guess, in an organic way, in an engagement between like text and image.
And how long did that take?
I mean, it took probably at least a year of just going back and forth, and then sort of several years of just really sitting with what am I doing, and also thinking I don't even know if I can do this. I don't really know if I can tear this very Pulitzer Prize winning photo up in half and like make it into a collage. So I'm just not going to ask anybody, and I'm just going to do it, and then we'll see what happens. So it was a year or two of experimentation, and then kind of 8 months of just at the computer all day writing and tearing and moving things around.
It's interesting that you chose a villanelle, and then you have one that's almost more free. And do you go back and forth between form and not form? I'm going to actually I'm just going to pull everybody back up so that we can all talk to each other. But I'm sure that Davon has ideas about form and not form too. So let's talk. Tell us about why the villanelle. I love villanelles. I'm into villanelles, just because they're so hard.
They're so hard. They are so hard, and so they work well with like giving instructions, right? Because they're so obsessive. It's like, and don't forget this, and don't forget this, and did I tell you to do this?
It's like parenting.
So I figure when Lot's wife gives directions, she would say it in a villanelle. I mean, I do move between in the book. Part of the technologies of form that happen in the book. There's a wide variety. There's sonnets and villanelles and kind of invented forms and. I'm someone who I hated forms and was really afraid of them many years ago. So I forced myself to do them. And then I realized, oh my God, like there's so much that's freeing in some ways about that. So for me, it is this engagement with and this tearing apart of forms is very much a part of the book as well.
Cool. That's great. What about you, Davon? Do you do forms or not forms, or make up your own forms, or
something that's sort of interesting? I was when I was doing my MFA. My professor, Barbara Reese, had us do this exercise where we had to translate a famous piece of literature, like a paragraph from paratactic to hypotactic. And I had never done that before. And so I translated a paragraph from The Wizard of Oz, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum, which I ended up teaching for years when I was teaching 8th grade. But I translated it into hypotactic. And what was really cool about this experience is that my writing style like emerged from that exercise. And it was really just trying to take the simplified language and just sort of kind of muscle it up with long sentences and lots of metaphors and adjectives. And I ended up getting it published in Drunk Monkeys. It was called After the Cyclone, and it was about Dorothy, sort of after the cyclone comes and picks her up. But that exercise is what sort of helped me develop my style of writing. So I think it's a great exercise for students, for writers. Just take something that you're used to reading, something famous, and give yourself the confidence to rewrite it.
Yeah, or like Deborah, take a Pulitzer Prize winning actor, just rip it.
Reverence is my mode usually.
That's super funny. Let me just really quick run through and make sure that we all know how old approximately your children are, just so that we have some context for where you're working and how you're working right now. Do you mind, Deborah?
Sure. I have an 11-year-old daughter, Zaya. The poem I read was when she was actually closer to probably your kid's age, Devon. So she was little and trying to figure out the mittens.
My daughter Georgie she turned 2 in February.
Oh, baby.
And so she went down without a peep. We made pizza on the grill tonight, and we let her help try. So you can imagine an hour from now, she was covered in flour. And my wife and I are expecting November 22nd. So I really need to write as much as I can.
Oh yeah.
Before that happens.
I think every one of us knows the imposed deadline of pregnancy. Like, how much can we get in?
Yeah, I'm like sleeping great, but like
yeah,
for now.
For now.
Yeah. Yeah. And Helen, yours are grown, right?
Yeah, they're both home now because of COVID.
Of course.
My daughter turns 24 tomorrow.
Yay! Happy birthday.
21. Yeah. So we're back to full house, which is lovely for me. I love having them home. I think they are less happy about it. She had her own apartment in DC, and her job went remote. So we just thought it'd be better to be together than to be apart. And then my son was in his spring semester of junior year at college, and they just sent them all home with about 36 hours notice. So
yeah, that was a kind of crazy time. It's like, pack up, go home, bye.
Crazy.
And then everybody, my son is a freshman in college, and he just was not happy that his first year was mostly at home. You know,
that's really hard because you make that big leap to go and then come back. It's very hard to come back.
Well, and I mean, I think every single parent at any stage of the game, whether you're an established parent like Helen or an emerging parent like Davon, then you still have to like countenance the fact that they're here 24/7. Like the first several weeks of the quarantine was just quarantine. It was just having just human beings. I mean, I've never had a roommate that stayed this long in my house. You know, like
we all had to get used to each other.
Yeah. Are you guys getting writing done during this time period? Are you finding ways to carve out space for yourselves for your creative life?
My wife is a nurse, and so she works night shifts. So typically, if I'm up to date with my high school work and my adjuncting work, then I'll try to use the nights that she's working to write. It's hard to write after a long day, but that's when I've been trying to carve out the time.
Great. That's good. Yeah. What about you guys? Are you finding time, Deborah?
I in the beginning, I was actually, I felt like I had to just write stuff just to like move through that kind of, the emotional intensity of the beginning of the quarantine. And then, it's kind of come in ebbs and flows with my own schedule. My daughter's been in homeschool, but that's just meant like, making sure she's on the Zoom and like, can she, is she really doing what she's supposed to be doing? So I'm kind of trying to really take advantage of pockets here and there. So it's not been consistent.
Right. What about you, Helen? Having your kids home, you must be more like, let's do things together.
Well, actually, everybody's super busy. So my daughter does her whole entire job from the couch, and my son finished school in his room. I got COVID like right away, and I was in bed for 2 weeks, and then it took me about 3 weeks to be able to walk around.
Wow.
Glad to have you back.
Welcome
back.
But yeah, I go in the bedroom, and Bruce, my husband, sits in the living room with my daughter. I mean, it's just not that big here.
Yeah.
But everybody works, and I've been teaching some, so that's been new because I had a fellowship this year, so I didn't teach all year, but this month I'm a Zoom teaching.
It was a big fellowship. It was a big deal.
It was nice.
You can
I would love to keep having fellowships. Yeah, no, I got to go Zoom time, so I got the year off from teaching.
It's amazing.
It's really key. Yeah, it's great.
Is it for your next project? Is the Guggenheim about? What was your? Are you allowed to talk about it? I don't even know what the thing is.
You know what? I'm writing a new book.
Yay!
So the time was to get this thing going, and COVID threw. It slowed me down absolutely, and you never get as much done as you want. But I really feel like the book is launched. So when I go back to work full time in September, I hopefully have enough under my belt to keep going.
Yeah, it feels like we're always finding deadlines and pushing through to get to, like, it's almost like the world is giving us all these deadlines all the time that we just have to get through our stuff, right?
It's busy.
It's
It's always been busy.
Yeah. So I want to just pull us all back to technology real quick, and I'm going to let Christina ask questions, but I wanted to ask Helen you one particular question, which is, so in your books, I know that technology is at the heart of usually a family falling to pieces, but the technology part, let's see. So in my writing, I will put a cell phone in, and then by the time I'm done with the piece, all of a sudden my piece is dated because they're flipping the phone open. And now I have to go through and change all the verbs from flipping to swiping. Do you know what I mean? And it, like, anytime I put any technology in the heart, or even just have people use technology, I fear that it is dating the piece. And on something difficult like a novel, like you write full-length things that are very technology-centric. How has it worked to have technology evolve? Like, I know what you created for this novel is not yet available, but they have VR, they have all kinds of stuff. It's just not quite as advanced as, I love the premise of this novel, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I really struggled hard to write now while I was writing it, and I did that for a long time. So as everything kept changing, I kept changing it. So I kept going back and changing the technology and changing what, and I have, luckily at my job, every year, one thing is I have get a research assistant, a graduate student to help me. And so these kids just poured so much information into my head, and there was so much going on that I rewrote constantly. And then Trump got elected. And once that happened, I thought, I can't keep doing now, because Trump added into the picture of what I was trying to do. It just, as in everything else, he took over, so that's when I stopped the book. So it stopped in 2016.
Interesting.
I couldn't accommodate him in this kind of surfing the zeitgeist.
Well, it's probably a good idea, because then you add the whole COVID thing. I mean, it's just like the layers and layers of what reality is sort of throwing at us as writers. I mean, I don't know, maybe in poetry, perhaps it's a bit easier because you are normally writing about what is going on or something in the past, but you're not normally needing to invent an entire fiction that is self-contained, right? I mean,
generally, I think that's certainly true for me. And so I think that it's not the same kind of having. I don't have to navigate it in the same way. I write prose also. I have this book I'm writing, a nonfiction book, where because it was written over such a long period of time, I'm having to go back through and go, okay, but it's different.
Wow. Christina, you should talk, because I'm overwhelming myself.
Okay. So all of you teach, and you're in academia, and how does especially now when everyone is like teaching from home, or I guess you're done with the semester, but when you were teaching at home and then trying to do your own work, what was that more difficult or less difficult, or did it help to go to your school versus teaching online? Did that affect your work because you are actually on the computer more?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, it's sort of like, like the double-edged sword in the sense where I spend so much more time on the computer than I ever have, that by the time I want to write, like, I can't look at a screen any longer. But at the same time, I normally work a 7.5 hour day at the high school, and so I have more time to write because I'm not putting in the same amount of teaching hours in the sense of lecture and whatnot. So I have more time, but I'm just sort of exhausted from looking at a computer.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Could be screened out. Do you all do Zooms as well with your classes? Like that also is another thing where it's hard to, or maybe you write free. How do you compose? Let's ask that. How does everybody compose when they're writing? Are you working freehand? Are you working on the computer? How's it? What's your ratio of pen to print?
I always write on the computer because I can't read my handwriting.
Yeah. I'm all on the computer as well.
I used to be exclusively like handwrite, then type in, then handwrite. And over the years, and especially with a poem, because you really want to see, for me, like where the line is going to be in relation to the next line, I tend to do more on the computer, but I edit always, with hand, and, by hand. I have to print it out and, literally cut it up sometimes. And
see what it looks like. That's neat. Do you guys all print out your stuff before you edit, like as you're editing it, or do you just edit it on the page?
I like to take a draft that's almost done, and then I'll make it into a new doc, and that's sort of like my process of leaving the draft and then this new piece. But one thing I always tell my students, because we all work so much on the computer, is like never press delete, and there's something about pressing, like when I look at my drafts and I'm working on something, I always press enter. And there's always so much space when I'm trying to transition from one part to the next that I just can't do on paper. And it's like has become my process of not deleting, pressing enter, and then always making a new draft when I feel like the piece is ready and I'm doing those final edits.
That's cool. Do you have a system for naming those files so you don't trip over which file goes first?
Typically the title changes, and I leave the title, like whatever the file is saved as, because it'll save as like the first sentence. Yeah. And then I won't title it until I feel like it's ready. But that's just like part of the process that I've created over years. And there's nothing special about it. It's just, that's the only way that I can do it.
That's neat. Helen, your titles are fantastic. Do you come up with your titles first or last?
Oh, thank you. Actually, this title came from a poem of Brenda Shaughnessy's that I love, and it's the epigram to my book. And I'll just read you the quote. I love her work. I just think she's a wonderful, wonderful poet. Now, find the page. It's from a poem called Drift. I'll go anywhere to leave you, but come with me. All the cities are like you anyway. And I think I was just trying to write about attachment and so how hard it is to unattach, how attachment in some ways is stronger than love. And because my characters go in and out of these different multiverses, there's this thing about all the different cities, but they're all the same because they're still the same characters. So it just kind of felt perfect. So that's how I got that.
That's pretty great. Yeah. I also, one thing that I really like, I haven't read your book, so I'm dying to read your book. I try not to read before interviews because then I end up being fanny and instead of being like just an interviewer. So, but the situation that she is employed by somebody who's 19, that the main character is like mom age and is employed. Yeah,
that's the way it was during all those startups. Like, the big thing was to get into Stanford and then drop out because you got money for a startup. So they were all leaving school in sophomore, junior year. My character Donnie lives in the entrepreneur's dorm, which there is one. So it's this kiddie culture, all these kids coming up with stuff, but still being kids, and that's part of it. I was thinking a lot about Sheryl Sandberg at the time and just how she was like this den mother to these boy geniuses. I mean, now I don't see her that way at all. I'm much more negative about her than I was then. But it was interesting to me how she was kind of put in there to corral them.
Interesting.
So what are your next projects? Debbie, I know you have been working on this project for a really long time. Is your next project kind of like a mixed media as well, or is it just poetry? Or
it's so the book I'm trying to finish right now is completely different from this. It's actually a book on it's a nonfiction kind of mixture of essays, memoir, and analysis and lyric. And it's on divas and why we love them, why we hate them, why in particular women of color, kind of, what fascination we have and what they've done, both for me personally, but also like kind of in American culture over the last 50 years. So that's the series of essays that a book of essays I've been working on and I'm racing to finish.
That sounds so fun.
Sounds cool.
I love divas.
Yeah, me too.
So how about you, Davon?
So the thing I really enjoyed about writing my book the most are some of my favorite pieces to write, and you can sort of tell because the tone changes where my experiences growing up in the Pine Barrens. I grew up in a really small town called Chemung, which is a Native American term for bighorn. I teach at a school that's named after a Native American tribe. There's no Native Americans in our town, but the town itself was the first Native American reservation in America called Brotherton. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I really enjoyed writing about the Pine Barrens, and so I want to work on a new collection that is about part of being brown and growing up and in the Pine Barrens and sort of the struggles I had, but also the things I loved about growing up in the woods. I mean, just now, like I live right by a lake. There's some bunnies that just ran on my yard, and
Bunnies.
there's beauty in this place and there's ugliness, and so I want to be able to straddle these really great experiences of riding my bikes in the woods, but also being tokenized, and I really want to try to experience it. I'm just toying between memoir and flash fiction. I really, the flash fiction is just my memoir written as fiction, so it'll probably just be another memoir. But I think it'll sort of stay the same form and play on place, but also race.
Well, when you say that you were, it wasn't very, well, it was pretty homogeneous out there. Can you say exactly how much so? I mean, were you the only one, or were you one of a few, or how did that feel?
So I think about in my graduating high school class, there were about 4 African Americans and maybe 3 people of Asian Asian ancestry. That's it. Maybe a couple of people that were Latino, like not many. And so I love where I grew up, but I also know what it's like to be of color in a place where there isn't.
How big was the graduating class?
Probably about 400 and change.
Oh man.
Yeah. Sorry, that makes the number a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's part of growing up, and we have a diversity problem. But I think that as an educator, my job is to be able to teach diversity, and that's sort of what I love about technology right now. I was talking to someone about this the other day. Is like, as much as I don't like using Twitter, I'm really enjoying the fact that I get an influx of contemporary writers that I don't get from anthologies that we get from universities. And that's a way to get diverse voices into the classroom. Because I have a curriculum, but I also have autonomy.
Yeah,
so.
That's okay.
So interesting.
Helen, how about you? You're working on a novel and you're researching it?
It's, really heavily researching. I can't tell you too much about it, but part of it takes place during the siege of Sarajevo.
Oh.
So I was in Bosnia in the fall, which was really fascinating, kind of mind-blowingly so, and actually really frightening for this time here in America, because you see that Sarajevo was one of the most diverse cities in the world. They used to call it the Jerusalem of Europe, and for 4 years people just shot and killed each other, their friends, their neighbors, themselves, and tortured each other and destroyed this country. And now they're trying to rebuild and go back, and you see how easily that could happen for us here. It is happening for us here. People have turned against each other. It's crazy. So being actually in this country that just destroyed itself just terrified me coming back. And then with being locked up by COVID, it actually sadly is helping me write my book because my characters are, in hiding in the basement.
Oh,
Go outside. I was actually doing some research, and this war reporter was writing an op-ed for somebody and said, well, the last time I felt like this was when I was in Sarajevo. Can't go outside. Now, obviously, it's very different. We're much more fortunate in that. Hopefully, not people aren't trying to kill us every second. But yeah, it was a scary thing. Scary here.
sure. When you were in Sarajevo just recently, was there a schism between the people who were older, who had already experienced this for very many years, and the younger generation? Like, did you find that there was, like, was there a difference between how they went about trying to rebuild?
I think that the war is very present still there. Like, the city is just full of bombed out buildings, and you can see where all the mortar fire went off, and there are a lot of things that are just still trash, even though it's 30 years. And because they divided the country up into 3 sections, with 3 different governments and 3 different presidents, but there's supposed to be one country of Bosnia-Herzegovina, it's almost impossible to function. So the economics are lousy. They've really not rebuilt economically. I was there writing a piece for Travel and Leisure on adventure travel there, because it's absolutely one of the most beautiful, breathtaking places I've ever been. And that's like one of the small pieces of commerce that they're working on, but it's frozen. So the kids that I met, some of the guides were kids, they seemed bitter about their prospects. And everybody was bitter about the corruption. But I also felt everyone was so sick of the war that they just wanted to get past it. But one of my guides was in her 30s, so she was the little baby during the war, but of course it affected her entire life. So I did speak to some kids in their 20s, but everybody over 30 something, the war was their life, I mean, it sounds bleaker than maybe it is. It's, there's a lot of music, and it's always been very culturally rich, and it's gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. But you see what happens when you ruin these places, when you ruin these cities, like in Syria. Like, how do you come back from that?
Yeah, the coming back from it is the what we want. We want to know, well, hopefully, how do we stay?
Actually, I was gonna ask that, because I mean, obviously, COVID has affected all of us, but with everything going on, civil rights in this country and where we are with everything, with Trump, and how has that affected your work at this point? Have you been writing about it, or?
Yeah, I actually, I remember when I was a kid, my mom spent a lot of time telling me stories and rules. She would tell me stories that served as rules for sort of how to be a black man. Things you couldn't do. Driving and getting pulled over by the police was definitely a big part of our conversation. But I remember, and this is a piece that I just finished, my mom told me a story about my grandmother's uncle in Alabama who was out on a Saturday night. And if you're black out on a Saturday night, and again, this is part of the storytelling, but that was considered loitering. So apparently the police picked him up, took him to a holding cell, and he never came home, and he was killed. And so part of that story is, I'm sure there's some truth to it, but it's also part of kind of this myth making that I think is rich in my family and in lots of families. But it also, the story kind of served as a warning for me. So that was a piece that I was working on, and I definitely think that the things that are happening are sort of charging some of those stories. And at the end of it, I talk about the fear I have, for my daughter, and what am I going to tell her? What stories am I going to say to her? And I'm watching people die on television, and that was the first time I've ever written about her. And there was only a couple sentences. But it hit me to really think about the stories that I was told, and what am I going to do as a parent? Tell her, what am I going to warn her of? So
Yeah, I don't know about anyone else, but I think one of the things my parents once told me was that they were born in Shanghai and they came from there, and Shanghai was quartered, and there was a huge park, but like on the front it said no dogs or no dogs and no Chinese allowed, right? So like whenever I hear anything that uses any kind of animal imagery, I get really like it the kind of like gets me going. Like I start to, get those feelings of like I have to write, I have to, talk about this. Kind of feels like I don't know. It's like you're going over the same turf that you thought was over, but
right.
Here we are. Helen, I totally understand how you feel about coming back here and seeing this whole thing. It must have been kind of weird. I mean,
well, it's just being there. I saw what civil war does to people, right? And we know that we had one once. And I guess we're still fighting some of that war. But I really hope things change before we tear ourselves apart.
Right. How about you, Deborah?
Early on, I was writing about. I have a friend who lives in Milan, so they of course had experienced the horrors of the pandemic. Sort of they were about 2 weeks ahead of New York, and so we were just writing letters, and those letters ended up a couple of them transformed into poems, but they began simply as letters toward one another. And then, to be honest, in the last couple of weeks, it's been hard. And so the only way in I found, similar to what you were saying, Davon, was just I keep a journal that's very infrequent, for my daughter, where I write to her. That I wrote a bit in that about the moment. And of course, as I was looking back on it, there was also the Trayvon Martin moment, and there was there were the moments, right, that had marked the writing, but that was the only way in. And again, it was like halting sentences. So
yeah, and it's like trying to see, like what you said, like where I fit in this narrative, because again, my experience as a Black man is different, and so when I write about it, I just find that I have to be very cautious that I'm not trying to capitalize in the moment. I'm not trying to tell a story to somehow gain something, and so there's like this very tight rope that I'm trying to walk where I'm not trying to force a narrative on me that isn't mine. And so the writing, again, the story itself serves as a warning rather than this is my experience and this is what happened and this is what I want you to know.
You mean writing what you want to write versus what other people want to hear at this moment?
And I'm having problems with that, like submitting work and trying not to just write about race to write about race. But if the story calls for it, then it'll happen. But if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, it's so that idea of what is appropriate. Like, do you jump on a media thread because it's an opportunity, or do you take your time and cautiously pick your way through this? It's difficult. It's a difficult thing. Listen, we are getting near the end of our time, and I wanted to ask each of you if you have anything that we didn't touch upon in this crazy. Our subjects were jumping all over the place because of the world. So if you have anything that you want to say or pitch or remind us of, I know, Deborah, you're a founder of a very cool collective. So we should probably have asked you about that. But if you've got anything do you want to talk about, let us know right now. This would be your time. So Deborah, you can.
Deborah, can you please talk about it a little bit, please?
Sure. So I actually, 10 years ago, I co-founded an organization called Canto Mundo that is an organization for Latino poets. But I actually we ran it for 10 years, and I stepped down last year. So after 10 years, we said we would serve it for 10 years, and those labors of love, right? Where we actually weren't a 501c3, so we were all unpaid. So it was my second job. And it was great to be able to also to build the thing and then also understand what it means to let it go as a founder, which was actually great. I was ready. My co-founder was ready, and now it has a new home. It was housed at Columbia during its last few years, and now it's housed at the University of Arizona. But yeah, so that's
awesome.
That's wonderful.
Davon, do you have anything you want to say or?
Yeah. So like you said about we're inserting ourselves into the media, into this narrative. And again, Twitter is definitely a great tool. But I'm very weary and I tiptoe about the things that I say, just because, I'm also a public employee. But I just think, like, based upon all of the people and where we are, like, what can we actually do with the skills and tools and the resources that we have to make some type of change? And for me, going out and protesting isn't something that I can do. But I know that I have power as an educator. And so what I'm trying to do, and I don't know what's going to happen or where it'll go, but I'm really trying to collect resources of voices of diversity, and not just writers. Like today, I was posting a teaching resource about Bessie Coleman, being the first African American, Native American woman to get her pilot license.
Huh.
And so stories like that are stories that I wasn't told from schools when I was a kid. And these are things that my mom tried to teach me, but I find that as an educator, my real goal right now, on top of writing for myself, is trying to get these resources in teachers' hands in communities that need diversity. So I'm trying to do like a hashtag teach diversity. I don't know what's going to happen because I'm still trying to figure it out, but
it's pretty exciting.
That's my goal, is to get resources to teachers who don't feel comfortable teaching diversity.
Good luck with that. That's actually a really great goal. Very cool. Helen, do you have anything that you wish that we had asked you?
Well, you might want to ask me why I'm on the floor now, but that's because I have to grab my husband's computer and it started to die. So.
Battery life.
Or an outlet.
It seems appropriate for a technology.
Technology.
How technology also fails us.
The biggest Luddite there is.
Yes.
Yeah, the only thing, I was really impressed by what you both had to say. And Deborah, like you, I started an organization called Right On New York City. Mm-hmm. And what I do is train my graduate students and send them into area schools for kids who are underserved to teach creative writing and literature. And it's been really fun and exciting. And like you, I don't get paid for it. But it's been 4 years, and we've sent out 24 paid fellows who we trained, and we've taught hundreds of kids. And it's probably the most exciting thing that's been happening for me. I love it. I love it. I love seeing these kids. They're just amazing. They're so thirsty for literature and for a platform and to get their voices heard. And my students go crazy. They love them so much. It's nice. It's small.
That's super great. Well, I'm afraid that we are sort of out of time. We're kind of over time. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. And I want to especially thank Deborah Paredez and Davon Loeb and Helen Schulman for being such wonderful, open, and like willing to go anywhere that we go and following us around. And anybody who is watching this on the internet later or now, I wanted to encourage you to come back in July, because we have more people in July. We do this once a month on the second Tuesday of every month. You can always find it at penparentis.org, which is down there at the bottom of the screen. And I just want to thank everybody for coming, and thank you all for being such great writers. Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.